What's up, y'all? My name is Adama Ebo. I am a full time writer and director for TV and film, living and working in Los Angeles, California. And today we're going to be getting into my experiences interviewing to guest direct for TV. I have written and directed one feature film. It was my own film, my baby. It's called Honk for Jesus, Save Your Soul. Again, I was the writer and the director on that. But all of the things that I directed after Honk for Jesus, and that was in 2021, by the way. I'm going off the cuff here with this, y'all, so I'm going to try to get everything right and go sequentially as much as possible. So I didn't write anything down for this one, so forgive me if I get things a little jumbled up, but I'm going to try to keep it straight. So yeah, in 2021 is when I directed my feature film Honk for Jesus Save Your Soul, and directly after that, literally like I wrapped Honk for Jesus Save Your Soul on like a Saturday, and by that next Monday, I was in pre-production for my first TV directing gig, my first guest directing gig, and that was on Atlanta season 4. I directed the Born to Die episode, and it was a ton of fun and kind of set the bar for me as far as guest directing goes. Getting that gig was, unconventional. I'm not sure how most people go about getting their very first directing gigs or guest directing gigs, especially for TV. But it was definitely an unconventional, I would say, way that I went about, or that opportunity came about. So I was working on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and that's the TV series Mr. and Mrs. Smith as a writer. And through that gig, I got to know Donald Glover, and we got on really, really great. Like, he is, a weird, nerdy black kid from the area of Metro Atlanta that I'm from. And so one day he sort of hit me and my sister up and was like, hey, can we just talk like the two of us? And this is still in the pandemic, mind you. So he wanted to like hop on a Zoom, just the two of us outside the writer's room, and just, chat a bit about like our life and our work and the kind of stuff that we like. And so we did that. It went really, really cool. It was real dope. And within that conversation, I mentioned to him, now, mind you, this is before I shot the feature. So, we shot the feature starting in June 2021. And so this had to be like, let me think, back in maybe March or April of 2021. So yeah, so this was back before I actually shot the feature, my feature. And I just let him know like, oh, I'm also a director. I'm shooting a feature this summer, but I've also shot shorts because I went to film school. I have like a portfolio of short films that I've directed. And he was like, oh, you're a director? And I was like, yeah, yeah, it's cool. And he was like, oh, do you like want to direct on the last season of Atlanta? And I was like, yeah. I was completely caught off guard and really, really surprised. And it was cool. He kind of just offered me the gig because we got on really well, because of the vibes that he felt, I think, between the three of us, because my sister was also in this conversation, but also because during this conversation, we were talking about television and film and taste, and our tastes aligned really, really well. And so, based off of that, I think he thought that we had similar enough taste that he wanted me to direct on Atlanta season 4. And I find out sometime later that I think aside from Donald, no one else from Atlanta has directed on Atlanta. And I think he was into the idea. At the time, I think he had me in mind for a very specific episode. It was the mockumentary. The episode, I believe, is called "The Goof Who Sat Next Door," and it was about the black exec at Disney who made a Goofy movie happen, because a Goofy movie is a black movie, y'all. But it's a black movie. Like Tevin Campbell, who made the decision, you know what I mean? But anyway, that episode is mockumentary, and part of Honk for Jesus, Save Your Soul is mockumentary, faux documentary. And so I think he had me in mind to direct that one. And that one was also written by Francesca Sloan, who was the showrunner for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, met Donald because she was writing, she wrote on season 3 and 4 of Atlanta. We went to film school together, by the way. And she was the one who hit me and my sister up and was like, hey, what are y'all doing? Do y'all want to write on this show? And that show ended up being Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So originally, I think he wanted me to direct on the Goof Who Sat Next Door, but I also wasn't certain that this was actually going to happen, because he asked me about directing. I was like, for sure, and then didn't hear about it for a little while, and then firmly got into, deep pre-production for Honk for Jesus. And then I get a call from, I think, their line producer being like, hey, Donald told me to call you. You're supposed to be directing an episode of this last season of Atlanta. And so that's that's what happened. That's how that happened, y'all. And I ended up directing the Born to Die episode, like I said. And Donald felt like that episode needed a very specific, I think, directorial perspective. And so I ended up switching to that episode, and I love Atlanta. I was a big fan before working on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, before meeting Donald, and so it was a real dream to be able to direct on that series. It's fantastic. I don't know if people haven't watched it yet. I'm sure there are people who haven't, but it was popular, it was critically acclaimed, all that stuff. And so if you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's good. So yeah, that's how I got my Atlanta gig, and it was really chill. And like I said, it sort of set the bar for what I like as far as guest directing, for sure. Donald was really insistent and passionate that I take the reins of the episode, even though I had just directed my first feature days, or, I guess at this point, by the time we get on set, weeks before getting on set to direct this episode, like an episode of the final season of his baby. And even though I had never directed television before, but he was, like I said, really insistent that I really take the reins on that, and like handed it off to me and left me alone to do what I do as a director, you know what I mean? Hiro Murai, who is like the primary producing director on the series, he directed the pilot, he's directed a bunch of the big major episodes. He is Donald's guy as far as directing goes. He was there also on set, but also in pre-production, and left me alone in both cases, just like Donald did. Donald was also on set. He's in the episode. He acts in Atlanta. He was kind of just there like a proud dad, like taking BTS photos. I actually have a picture that he sent me that is of, I think, me and my sister, because I put my sister in my episode, y'all, as an extra. He sent me a photo that he took of me and my sister sort of on set, hanging out in between takes, and probably in between setups or something like that. And so it was really chill. Like I said, Donald really wanted me to take the reins. I think I've said that. That's the third time I've said that at that point. My God. But he told me he wanted me to treat it like it's my own short film. And if you know anything about the show, there are specific through lines, but they don't really necessarily have huge plotty narrative ties. And so that was possible for me to do, and that's what I did. And God, what an experience. It was an amazing first TV directing experience. It was definitely an amazing first, guest directing gig. And I'm going to say this again for probably the third time at this point, but set the bar for my guest directing experiences. And I loved directing Donald. He's such a phenomenal actor, and has like watching him morph in between scenes and in between takes, and giving him direction and seeing him incorporate the direction into each and every take. It's just like, it's like all you can kind of ask for as a director, you know what I mean? And so I think he really enjoyed the experience as well, because I was actually, it was, months after that, Honk for Jesus. I guess not. No, months after that, because that was in July, and then now we're fast forwarding to January, and Honk gets into Sundance, and it does well. There's sort of a bidding war between two or three studios for who was going to buy the film. And I was constantly on the phone with like my producers, with my sister, who was a producer on the movie, with Daniel Kaluuya, because Focus Features, who we ended up going with for the film, Jordan Peele was working with Universal Studios at the time, and Focus Features is sort of like a subset of Universal Studios. And so he was really wanting to go with them. And so I was getting calls from Daniel and all that stuff. It was a whole thing. But that exact same day, y'all, it was really weird. I started getting calls from Donald, and I was like, what is going on? Like, I was like, today can't get stressful enough for me. I was really trying to, like, as the director of the feature, make the best decision possible for the sale of my first feature film that got into Sundance. And then Donald's calling me. I was like, oh God, is something wrong with the episode? Like, what's happening? No, he called me up, was like, hey, what are you doing like this spring? Because the other show, so he was working on two shows at the same time. One was Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which I wrote on with my sister, but the other was this show called Swarm. And again, they were happening at the exact same time. They also ended up shooting at the exact same time or around the same time. And so he asked me what I was doing that spring. This is now spring 2022. Yeah, this is going to be spring 2022. It's because that show was going into production and he asked me if I wanted to direct on Swarm. And I was like, yeah, I would. What I look like. Yeah, I love working with Donald. I love being in the Donald Glover camp. And so I was completely down. It ended up being like a bunch of the same people from Atlanta who worked on Swarm because the pilot shot in LA, but the majority, all the rest of Swarm shot in Atlanta. And so it was a lot of the same crew. I had the exact same AD that I had when I was on Atlanta. I got really attached to him. He was great. Shout out to Bennett and Rob, the second AD. Like it was the exact same team. It was perfect for me. But I said, hell yeah, I'll direct on Swarm. Adana and I actually wanted to write on Swarm instead of Mr. and Mrs. Smith because it was like, short answer or short blurb is that it's about a Black woman serial killer. My sister and I are into true crime, like a ton of people, like a ton of women. And you kind of just didn't see women in those kind of roles. And you kind of just don't. And so we were really interested in writing on that one. We ended up being on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which was a dream. I have no complaints, but I felt like it kind of came full circle because I got to direct 3 of the 7 episodes of Swarm. So now we're getting into a little bit of a different situation with Swarm because Donald wasn't the showrunner for Swarm. Another woman, her name is Janine Neighbors, was the showrunner for Swarm. And so I had to meet Janine, and which means I had to interview with her. And it was different than like with Atlanta because Donald was like, you want to come do this? I was like, yeah. And I did it. I didn't have to like talk to Hero before getting into it, before the deal got made or anything. We definitely talked, in pre-production and stuff like that and got to know each other. But I didn't really have to like interview for Atlanta. You know what I mean? But for Swarm, I kind of didn't have to Donald was just like, hey, do you want to do this? But I did have to like meet with Janine, which felt like an interview. And so I'm going to post a little picture of what I wore to my meeting with Janine because I I really want to look cute for it. I like to look cute all the time, but it was my first guest directing interview. You know what I mean? And so I was like, look cute, look fly. And I actually don't think I own any of the pieces that I have in that outfit anymore. But it's and not because I don't like it because I outgrew it and not like in terms of style, like just physically, y'all. I was 30 at the time. Now I'm about to be 35, so it is what it is. But I don't look terribly different. But yeah, them clothes don't fit no more. So yeah, I linked up with Janine. I think we met for like at a coffee shop or something. It was definitely like not at a studio or anything like that. And I think there was food involved, so maybe it wasn't a coffee shop. Maybe it was like a proper little restaurant. But met up with Janine. And I think by that point I had gotten the script. And so again, for Atlanta, I didn't get a script until after I'd already said yes and Donald already said yes and the deal making was in place. It wasn't until yeah, until all that happened that I got the script for Atlanta. I got the script before meeting Janine for the first episode. I was riveted. I was like, this is wild. I've never seen this before. And so what I like to do before, and this is my first time like properly interviewing for guest directing, like I said. And so I had like a very loose plan about what I wanted to do going into this interview. So I read the script, I read it multiple times. And what I did was decide to coming to the meeting with how I planned or how I would plan to capture specific moments for the lead character who ends up becoming a serial killer and how I would portray the killing. I thought that that was probably the smartest way to go about it because the show is about more than killing. Hopefully shows with violence should be about more than the violence. But the main character, she's deeply affected. She's very misunderstood, but she's also extremely, extremely violent. And she transforms spectacularly over the course of the season. And I wanted to express how I would visually convey the murders. And I firmly believe that the murdering, the serial killing, it's not a slasher story. And so I firmly believe that like the violence, the murders were not the point. And I talked about how I would approach the kill scenes, which was to focus on the lead during the her kills, you know what I mean? And so if you take a look at the episodes that I directed, so I directed the second episode, I directed the third episode, and then I directed the finale. And so 237 are my episodes. In all of those episodes, the kills are sort of out of the way. Like you don't ever see the act of violence up close and personal. There's always something, sometimes it's in a wider shot, and so it's harder to see just naturally. Oftentimes, there are things that are purposely obscured, like someone's face, especially the victims. I didn't want to dwell on what the victims looked like because I think at that point you get into sort of like gore porn, and I'm not a fan of gore at all. And so I was like, that's the killing is not the point. The point is how this person feels before, during, and after she commits these horrendous acts of violence. And so that's what I really talked a lot about, working in obscurity, sort of like half seen, half not seen sort of ways for directing the violent episodes, for directing the kills. Yeah, that's what I really focused on that meeting. And the rest of it was kind of just vibes. It was kind of just me and Janine shooting the shit, getting to know each other and seeing if our sensibilities lined up. And it worked out, y'all, because I directed on Swarm, and that was my second TV directing gig, first official TV guest directing interview. So let's get to the next one, and that one is going to be for Poker Face Season 2, which happened in 2024. So we're leaping a couple of years. I did, like I said, Swarm in 2022. Now we're in 2024 for Poker Face. So Poker Face Season 2 was probably my most like conventional guest directing interview process up until that point. So it went through like the channels with this one, y'all. I had directed an episode of Atlanta at this point. I had directed 3 episodes of Swarm. All of those things did well. And so I think that I started to be on people's radar as far as television directing and guest directing. I also think that my reps just like do their jobs and they do them well. You know what I mean? They chat me up, they talk to people if they hear of opportunities coming up, they submit me and they get my name into people's brains and into their ears and stuff like that. And so the producers for Poker Face Season 2 hit up my reps and were like, "Hey, we really, really enjoy Adama's work on her feature," because we talked about my feature quite a bit, but also I think they also said on Swarm, and they were like, "We're curious if she would be interested in directing on Poker Face Season 2." And y'all, at this point, when it was my manager, Jairo Alvarado, who hit me up. At that point, when he hit me up about it, I was like, "Hey, yes, yes, I'm interested in directing on Poker Face," but also hadn't seen an episode. When I tell y'all, it had been like sitting in my Peacock watch list, like my watch later or watch list queue for so long. And I just like, a lot was going on before then, and I think that I was just really, really leaning on my comfort shows at that point. So I was doing a lot of rewatching of things that I love. It's a thing a lot of people do, but I definitely, for my mental health, lean on rewatches of some of my favorite things, some of the things that end up being comfort shows for me. And so I was deep in like I would like rewatch a show that I've seen 1,000 times top to bottom, and then start another one that I've seen top to bottom at that point in my life. I was in a cycle, y'all. And so I hadn't gotten to Poker Face, but when I got that call, I was like, okay, yes, set up the interview and I'm gonna watch every episode before the interview. And I did that. I definitely did that. And I watched it with my husband, my now husband. We weren't married at the time, but baby, I fell hard for Poker Face. It is the first season of Poker Face is so well done. It is so compelling. It takes the sort of like crime, murder, mystery, procedural genre and turns it on its head or approaches it in such a extremely unique way. I was floored, but there's still like a serialized through line going on. So it's like procedural, episodic based, but there's this episodic through line that's happening. I was floored. I was like, because I've been like, I think up until that point, I'd been very anti-procedural, and not anti-procedural as in like I don't enjoy them. Love procedurals. I, like many millennial women, people are obsessed with Law and Order SVU, but I also like really, really love Monk, which is an unconventional, I would say, tonally crime procedural. But I also really like Psych, and the procedurals are really, really cool. They're the foundation of so much television and the foundation of so much of my television taste. But I had always been like, that's not really what I make. I enjoy that stuff, but I don't like make that stuff. And I felt like Poker Face, like, shout out to Ryan Johnson, like, claps for Ryan Johnson. I think that he took the form and made it something wholly unique. And I was like, I had already said yes to the interview at this point, but I was definitely like, let's make this happen. I'm dying to direct on this show. And Ryan Johnson, he is also the director of the Knives Out films, and he has a very specific style to how he directs those films. The third one is a little different in a fantastic way, but he has a style, you know what I mean? And I love that. I love a directorial calling card. But he had definitely taken that style with him when he created and then crafted the visual language for Poker Face. And I was really excited to like delve into that. Atlanta and Swarm also have very distinct visual styles and visual languages, but they were ones that I felt completely comfortable, I think, stepping into. They kind of like aligned with how I like to make things and the types of things that I like to make and my directorial aspirations even. Ryan Johnson's style was completely different than anything that I had ever made, and definitely anything that I was, I think, conceptualizing. Like even the projects that I was developing at the time and thinking about directing, I was not thinking about the visual language in the same way that like, or even similarly to how Ryan Johnson directs. And so I was like chomping at the bit to be able to, get the chance to try out that type of directorial style. And so I watched all the episodes of Poker Face, and I watched them just in time for my meeting with the producers. And in this meeting, this one was a little different. We talked a lot, and it's probably because I was going to be working with a very established actress who is Natasha Lyonne, who's the lead of the Poker Face series. But we talked a lot about my approach to working with actors. And I dug into that because I think that's one of my strong suits, I think, is directing actors. It's what I think made Donald ask me to direct on Swarm after I worked with him on Atlanta. I distinctly remember there was a time where I told him that I don't like to call action usually. Sometimes I let my first AD do it, especially if we're like moving along, but creatively, I just don't like to call action. It feels strange to me. I just have like the utmost respect for actors. It is an incredible craft, and it is insanely hard. I could never even fathom doing what actors do. It's weird for me to be like, and perform now. And some people might say that like it's part of their job to hear action and then turn it on, right? But I know that as a creative, as an artist, I often need to like work my way into things, work my way up to things. And so something that I do is say like whenever you're ready. It'll be like cameras rolling, sound rolling, all of that stuff, all of the lead up, everybody's rolling, we're ready to shoot. But instead of saying action, I'll say whoever is the lead of the scene. So if it was Donald, I'll be like, all right, Donald, whenever you're ready. Some actors prefer that you call them, they prefer to stay in character, so they prefer that you call them their character's name. But it really is just dependent on the actor. I'm willing to do whatever they prefer or whatever they're comfortable with. You know what I mean? I'll be like, okay, whenever you're ready. And then that person will take whatever time they need. And then they'll start the scene. And like everybody will know the scene started because they started saying stuff. Like the person who starts the scene will start the scene. You know what I mean? It's not, I think it's like, it sounds unconventional to a ton of people at first. And then you do it, you experience it. And I find that a lot of actors really like it and they work better that way. And so we had done one scene. I think we had done the scene in like the D'Angelo basement and we had moved on to another location, and I think we were actually outside the Rallies at this point. and we were setting up the next shot. The cameras and grips were doing what they do, and the gaffers and stuff like that. But Donald was talking to me, and he was like, "I've never like seen somebody do what you do." And again, this is my first. We're now back to my first guest directing gig. I was like, "Oh shoot, what did I do?" And he was like, "No, no, the whenever you're ready thing." And he kind of expressed that he dug it and he really really liked it. And so I think it was that experience with him, or at least that was maybe part of the reason why he asked me to direct on Swarm. And so bringing it back to Poker Face season 2, I talked about that. I talk about how I like to really let actors drive the scene. I like for them to start the scene because they are the ones forming it. And that doesn't mean that I don't give direction at all. I give a lot of direction, I think, actually, when it's needed. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that I over direct at all. And so I talked about how I like to work with actors, how I like for them to feel very comfortable, how I like for them to feel equal parts in crafting both their characters and the scenes. I love in rehearsals really walking through things with actors, saying what I think should work, making them feel like they are crafting this and have equal input as well. And so in rehearsals, I'll walk through, I'll be like, this should be the blocking, such and such should be here. I think we should have such and such here. The camera should move X, Y, and Z way. And then the actors will, test out that blocking, but I really encourage them to be like, oh, I don't know if this feels right, man. Like, what if I were over here? You know what I mean? I think that like filmmaking 100% extends to making television is so highly collaborative. It's a waste, I think, when directors don't take advantage of really really stepping into that collaboration and trusting their collaborators and crafting something great with like-minded artists. You know what I mean? Anyway, I said all of that stuff in my interview, and I think they really, really dug it. And again, at this point, I had a little bit of a portfolio with Atlanta and Swarm, and so that was 4 episodes in total of television, that so they could see an example of my directorial talents or skills. And that was that. And so we talked about obviously the show, and I also talked about especially with Swarm, because that was a show that had violence at the center, or violence was a big part of it, and Poker Face violence is a big part too. It's a murder mystery. There's a murder every episode. And I talked about how I approach that, how the murder is not the point. And so I don't like to like lean into the messiness or the goriness of any of the murders, but how I recognize that this show, Poker Face, since it's a murder mystery, clues are very important. And so really emphasizing how I would dial into the clues of specific episodes, and talking about how the episodes that I had watched in the first season, how I was tracking clues and how I admired what the directors would do in any given episode with making sure that the audience was tracking clues, or at least making sure that like by the end of the episode, audiences could go back and be like, oh, that was a clue. You know what I mean? And so I talked a lot about that and how I would fold that into my visual style. It worked out because in 2024, I directed one of the episodes of Poker Face season 2. I felt very spoiled by being in the Donald Glover camp because I had so much autonomy over my Atlanta episode, and I built so much of the Swarm series because I directed the majority of the episodes. I worked with Dominique, the lead of that, the most, and we got quite close. And so I got to really put my footprint on a lot of it, visually and directorially. But with Poker Face, I was truly stepping into a guest directing experience. And, I think the like creative gods be smiling down on me sometimes because it was yet again like such a great experience. I had an all women's like core team, like my DP, my first AD, my second AD, all women. There's something that happens when women get together in this industry in lead roles and in that sort of capacity at that level. And it's magical, y'all. Now I'm spoiled by that. I had such a really fantastic time on Poker Face season 2. And I got to implement, I think, a lot of the things that I talked about in my interview process into my episode. And I got to talk to Ryan, and he impressed about like making sure that tracking clues was very, very important. Talking to Ryan and talking to one of the writers of the episode, Wyatt Kane, who was there the entire time. And it was like, okay, cool. I was on the right track with that. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, Poker Face was phenomenal. We shot that one in New York. So I got to be in New York for about like 3.5 weeks, I think, in Brooklyn and Williamsburg. And, we shot kind of all over, mostly in Brooklyn and a little bit in Queens. Yeah, Poker Face was fantastic. And the interview process with that was a little bit more like measured, a little bit more studied, because I wasn't familiar with the show. Well, I was familiar with the show, but I hadn't seen the show before saying yes to the interview, which was different from Atlanta because I had seen every episode that was out up until that point. Swarm was a first season situation, so that was more of a build. But yeah, I loved Poker Face, and that was my third time guest directing, but second guest directing interview situation. So let's get into this most recent guest directing interview experience. So the top of 2026, January 2026. Well, really, I got the call, or my reps got the call and informed me in December of 2025 that, and I have to be vague because I don't think that I'm allowed to talk about it just yet. I also haven't gotten the gig yet. I interviewed for it, and I might not get the gig, but I interviewed for it at the top of 2026. My reps called about it in 2025. Again, I'm going to try to be vague about it because I don't think that too much is supposed to be out about it at this moment. But as soon as I can say things about it, I will. Whether I get the gig or not, I'll let y'all know once announcements are being made and stuff like that, what I interviewed for. But called me up in 2025, December 2025. And I had just got married. We were going into the holidays and all that stuff. And so I was like, yo, is it cool if we meet in the very top of 2026? And so that's what we did. And I vlogged the experience. I vlogged the interview. Like I vlogged, me getting there and chatting about it just a little bit, of course, remaining vague, and then getting into like what I wore and stuff like that. And I'll make sure that I link that vlog in the description below. This interview experience was more similar to the Poker Face one, where it came about more traditionally or in a more traditional way. So they hit up my reps. My reps hit me up. I said, yeah, I'm very interested in doing that. And but this time, instead of sending me a script, they had already shot the first episode. They had already shot the pilot for the series. And so instead of sending me the script, they sent me the first episode to watch, and so I could get a feel for what this show is going to be, a feel for the characters, a feel for the tone and stuff like that. So I watched that down. I took notes as I was watching it. I think I watched it and then I went back and watched it again and then took notes as I was watching it during my second go around. So that part was different. I had never watched anything prior to a guest directing interview before. Also, sorry, I think the sun is going down. It's like 4:24 and I think the lighting is changing. So I'm gonna hurry this up. We're almost at the end. But yeah, so I watched the first episode, took my little notes, like my notes on like the episode, what was happening in the episode. I was also told when they sent me the pilot that they were hoping to do different things from episode 2 on, I think. Like I think they thought that I think what was expressed is that they thought that the first episode could have been had a little bit of more of a stylistic approach to it, a little bit more of a like singular vision directorially. And so they are keeping the first episode, they're keeping the pilot as is, but they were like, every episode onward, we want more of a distinctive vision with the visual style. And so after I did my watch through notes, I started just doing like sort of like stream of consciousness notes about what I thought the show would be conquering thematically and how I would visually represent that. I wrote down what I would bring with my distinct visual style, because now I have 4 episodes of television under my belt, right? And 2 of them are not the same, but have sort of a cohesive nature to it where they feel like sister shows, which is Atlanta and Swarm. But Poker Face is quite different. And so I have different directorial styles under my belt and have shown that I can sort of like morph my style or bring my vision into a situation where I'm not like the primary vision, but I'm able to sort of like slip my own style within that vision and still make it work for the show. And so I talked about that a little bit, or I wrote those sort of things down in my little notes. You know what? I'm gonna like get my little notebook and kind of like I don't know, is this boring? Read a couple of the like random notes that I made. Again, keeping it vague because I must keep it vague. So, one second. Okay, so what do we got here? Let me see what works for me to read. But I have the very first thing I have is process underlined, and then I wrote stories that I'm drawn to always have plenty of strong themes and elements of duality in them. So I tend to like to pull that duality out in my visual style. Okay, so I think that was something I noticed when I was watching is that there were I think maybe I wrote that down too. Oh well, hold on. Let me let me just read what I have. Hold on a second. I'm gonna start from the top. Stories that I'm drawn to always have pretty strong themes and elements of duality in them, so I tend to like to pull that duality out in my visual style. And then I wrote, I do a fair amount of dark comedies, so usually a lot of that duality is built into the tone. And then I put, i.e., Atlanta Swarm, Poker Face, Honk for Jesus, which are the things that I directed. And then I wrote, what's excited about blank is that duality is in parts of the show and story that isn't necessarily automatically in your face. The duality of this might be getting a little bit too specific, y'all. Hold on. Yeah, I'm gonna skip over that part. But I was really getting into in my notes about how I would take a visual approach to representing the duality because plenty of the characters and a lot of the themes are about two things existing at once within a person or a place or a situation. And so I really was like, okay, when I go into this meeting, I'm going to talk about how I feel like duality is a theme that's going to be explored within the show. Again, I'd only seen the first episode, but it seemed very apparent that duality was going to be a theme that would be explored in the show and how I was going to approach duality with my visual style, or the fact that I planned on approaching duality with my visual style. And let me see if I get into how. I do. Okay. So I wrote, my visual style approach to this series is to show all of these sides. For example, oh, now we're getting specific again, y'all. I'm so sorry. This is maybe not as good of an idea reading these notes as I thought, but let me see if there's anything else that might be interesting to hear. Hold on a second. Okay, so maybe I'll read this bit where I could see the visual style of that scene because was referring to a very specific scene from the pilot, and then talking about how I would do more scenes similar to that scene from the pilot in other episodes, but make it look a little bit more distinct or make it a little bit more visually stylistic. So this is what I said. I could see the visual style of that scene looking and feeling like art, almost portrait style, but with movement. Think these wide still shots in Atlanta meet the wide still shots in Wes Anderson films, but grounded. Like photography that captures the beauty of folks existing in their environments that could project the beauty and artistry of blank, which is one of the main points of the show, so I'm not getting into it. But yeah, y'all, so I wrote that kind of stuff down as talking points, and I brought my little notebook with me into the meeting along with my iPad, but I write on my iPad as well, but I love a physical notebook. I'm of that age. It's hard for me to get away from. Nothing feels like writing with a pen on physical paper to me. But yeah, so I wrote down my ideas or my thoughts. I put them in this notebook and I brought this notebook with me into the interview just to refer to. But as y'all will see in the vlog that I'm going to link below in the description, when I actually went on this interview, I had a moment where I got there early to talk to the camera, but also because I wanted time to like go back through my notes so that it felt more natural to bring up and talk about when I needed to work it into the conversation. And that's something else that I feel like I do quite well is that I have my talking points in mind, you know what I mean? Because I've written them down, I've read them and reread them. I also know them well enough. I also know myself and my style well enough that I should be able to recall it pretty easily. But I know everything well enough that like I can interject or insert them into the conversation even if it's not explicitly brought up, you know what I mean? Even if certain things aren't explicitly brought up, like, what do you think the themes of this show is? You know what I mean? I know that we're probably going to get somewhere in the conversation where I could start talking about themes, and then I would get into the whole like, well, I feel like duality is a theme, and this is how I would approach, shooting or injecting visual style of duality into this scene and that scene. You know what I mean? It comes off much more naturally when you prepare in that way, I think, or at least when I prepare in that way. Oh, this is kind of interesting. I wrote this down and I can't remember if I brought this up or if this ended up coming up in conversation in the interview or not, but I think some of it did. But this is, I think, an interesting thing that I wrote. My gut approach is usually how can I convey the essence of a scene both economically, but as interestingly as possible. Had to do that a lot on Atlanta and Swarm, specifically because we were usually trying to cover a lot in a short amount of time. This is very true. I put DG, so Donald Glover was also kind of allergic to traditional coverage, and I kind of am too. Always want to find the most interesting or honestly just a really cool way to frame and block scenes, which is absolutely true. I actually had a really tough time in film school understanding coverage, like traditional coverage. And it's because a lot of traditional coverage is boring. It's like how a lot of, you know, network is shot, how a lot of procedurals are shot. It's like shot, reverse shot. You know what I mean? And it's very economical and it definitely gets the job done. But I'm always like, how can we do that, but like make it cool? You know what I mean? Or how can we do that and make it a lot more interesting? And I was really encouraged to do that when crafting the visual language for Swarm on my episodes of Swarm by Donald. And so I was like, thank God, because and actually on Atlanta as well, like we were just like, can we get this in like one shot or can we like, cover it by like setting up the camera and dollying back and forth between or like putting the camera on a slider back and forth between these characters or anything that's interesting and just a little bit weird, but still accomplishes what needs to be accomplished as far as like covering the scene and making sure we're getting all of the information out of the scene from all the characters out of the scene that we need. But traditional coverage just it broke my brain for some reason, y'all. It's really the simplest thing. It's way simpler than what I was just talking about and coming up with all these other ideas, but I could not understand it. I was like, what is this and why would you shoot anything this way? But understanding it really helped me break the form. You know what I mean? You can't you do the opposite or you can't like do things not traditionally, I feel like, unless you understand tradition. But yeah, that's a little anecdote about coverage and why I'm kind of allergic to traditional coverage, and Donald Glover was too. And I think I did actually talk about this in the interview. Oh, this is interesting. So I'm talking about danger in this part of my notes, and because danger and fear is a big part of the show. And so I wrote, I could see being in shots that deny the audience immediate access to visual information. This is what I did in Swarm as well, to build tension. So extreme close-ups where you can't quite tell what's happening in the background. There's movement, but it's blurry. Or shots that are wide enough, but barely, just barely. The edges of the frame are cut off just enough to feel like something is happening, just beyond the visual reach that it feels uncomfortable. And so this is how I like to talk about my directorial style in interviews and in meetings about directing, which is in, I think, an artsy way. Like I'm talking about the art of directing, but I also talk about liking to make my days. I talk about hating going into lunch. I talk about how I like to work with actors and things like that. And I also make sure that like my artsy explanations are also very much tied to story and themes, which it should be anyway, but you'd be surprised about people who like set up cameras and then kind of just like ignore the story a little bit. It's weird. It's weird to me. But anyway, yeah, that was how I prepped for this most recent director's interview. And hopefully this was helpful. I know I couldn't get into too many specifics about this last one, but I promise I'll let y'all know what it is when I'm able to let y'all know what it is. But yeah, I hope y'all found this video informative, or at the very least pretty interesting. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments and I'll try to answer them if I didn't get into it in this interview or if I didn't get into it in this video. Sorry y'all, it's been a long day. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions or comments or thoughts about directing and guest directing and interviewing for guest directing and things like that, especially if I didn't get into it in this video, because like I said in the beginning, this was very off the cuff. But yeah, I hope that y'all enjoyed, because I enjoy y'all being here and checking out the YouTube videos that I make. Do all the things, please. Like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And I will catch y'all in the next one.